Kale stands sentinel outside a cave. For 300,000 years, they were the undisputed masters of Eurasia, the toughest, most resilient humans to ever walk the earth. They survived ice ages that would have wiped out modern populations in a year. They were the Neanderthals, our heavy metal cousins. Then, about 40,000 years ago, they vanished. For over a century, the story was simple: we killed them. Homo sapiens arrived, we were smarter, we had better weapons, we outcompeted them, or maybe even wiped them out in brutal primal warfare. It's a compelling but arrogant story. Lyra scraping hide, Finn drawing in cave. But what if I told you that story is wrong? What if the reason the Neanderthals went extinct is a secret far more tragic, more insidious, and utterly not what you think? Let's start with what we thought we knew, and why the science is now tearing it apart. The old theory paints the Neanderthal as a slow-witted brute. We had better tools, projectile spears, bows and arrows. We had better culture, art, complex language, vast social networks. Kale and hunting party bring down a mammoth. But recent discoveries have revealed that Neanderthals were far from simple. They created jewelry and art long before Homo sapiens in Europe. They cared for their sick and elderly, proving compassion. They were brilliant hunters and knew the landscape intimately. They were adapted to the cold like no other human. They were, in many ways, superior to us in the European environment. Close up on Kale making a flint tool, Lyra making beads. So, the idea that a few slightly smarter humans just showed up and effortlessly outcompetied them? It doesn't hold up. The arrival of Homo sapiens didn't lead to a swift genocide. Kale observing Eric and Alara in the distance. It led to 10,000 years of coexistence. Why did the strong, smart, perfectly adapted Neanderthals disappear over that long, drawn-out period? The answer lies in secrets hidden in their DNA, their social lives, and the very air they breathed. Kale and Lyra on a bluff, single wisp of smoke below. The real killer wasn't a better spear or a more advanced brain. It was simple math and genetics. Neanderthals had a fundamental flaw. Their population density was tiny. We're talking perhaps 10,000 to 50,000 individuals scattered across a continent. They lived in small, isolated family groups, maybe 10 to 20 people at a time. This had devastating consequences. Lyra comforting sick Finn in a dimly lit cave. Kale observing first, inbreeding. The evidence, locked in their fossilized DNA, is clear. Neanderthal groups were so small and isolated that they were constantly breeding within their close-knit family units. This phenomenon, known as inbreeding depression, causes a steady decline in genetic diversity, leading to lower fertility and weaker immunity. They were slowly poisoning their own gene pool generation after generation. Kale and Lyra over a fresh burial site second, the Ollie effect. This principle states that a population needs a minimum size to thrive. Neanderthals were always living on the edge. Just a small, continuous drop in female fertility, perhaps only a 4% decline per generation, would be enough to doom them entirely. A harsh winter, a predator attack, or a minor disease could wipe out a whole clan with no way to replenish their numbers. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, we traveled further, traded more, and crucially, interbred with much wider networks. We formed larger, more resilient, genetically diverse populations. The Neanderthals' small, isolated, self-reliant lifestyle, the very thing that defined them, was their ultimate demographic death sentence. Kale and Eric facing each other in a clearing, wary and tense. If we didn't wipe them out, what did we do? The most intimate and surprising thing possible. We loved them to extinction. Look in the mirror. If you're of non-African descent, you carry between 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This isn't a curiosity. It's the smoking gun of their disappearance. One prominent theory suggests that as Homo sapiens spread into Europe and Asia, we met and interbred with the local Neanderthals. Lyra and Alara sharing meat by a shared campfire. But here's the tragic twist. Low success rate. Many of the male hybrid offspring may have been infertile. This meant that while modern humans successfully absorbed Neanderthal DNA, Neanderthal populations were losing their most vital resource: reproductive women. Close-up of Lyra cradling a hybrid infant, Kale looking on: dilution. For every time a Neanderthal woman had a child with a Homo sapiens male, That child was a hybrid, not a full Neanderthal. Kale alone on a rocky outcrop, watching Lyra blend into a large Homo sapiens camp below. When their tiny clans mixed with the much larger population of modern humans, they were simply absorbed. Their distinct genetic and physical identity was slowly, relentlessly diluted out of existence. It wasn't a quick collapse, but a drawn-out, slow-motion assimilation. The Neanderthal didn't disappear in a sudden dramatic clash. They disappeared by becoming us. They didn't go extinct. They were absorbed. The last pure Neanderthal on Earth was likely an ancestor of someone living today. Kale hesitates, looking sick at a river crossing facing Eric. There is one other dark theory that explains the 10,000-year stalemate between our species. A kind of invisible wall that kept us apart for millennia. When Homo sapiens first emerged from Africa, we carried a unique suite of tropical diseases, parasites, and viruses. Neanderthals, living for hundreds of thousands of years in the colder, less disease-ridden north, had no immunity to these new, deadly visitors. The theory suggests that an invisible disease barrier formed in the Middle East, the first point of contact. If Neanderthals ventured south, they risked being wiped out by our diseases. If we ventured too far north, we hit the limits of their locally adapted pathogens. Both populations kept their distance, limited by a microscopic, biological no-man's land. What broke the barrier? Ironically, interbreeding. The gradual exchange of genes gave both species small immunities, a kind of genetic vaccine. But because the Neanderthal population was so small, and our disease load was likely much higher, the end result was inevitable. Lyra tending to feverish Finn in the dark cave, Kale heartbroken. Once the disease barrier lifted, the already struggling, inbred Neanderthal populations were suddenly exposed to a wave of pathogens they couldn't handle, delivered by the very people they had begun to mix with. The most forbidden secret of their demise? It wasn't just competition or sex. It was a devastating African advantage. A greater immunity to a higher disease load that gave us the final, slow-motion biological edge. Modern person looking into a mirror, Neanderthal features subtly reflected. The story of the Neanderthal extinction is not a simple tale of one species being dumber or weaker than the other. It's a complex, multi-layered tragedy rooted in their demographics, their isolated lifestyle, their vulnerability to new diseases, and finally, their assimilation into our family. They weren't wiped out by our superior intellect in a swift, violent war. They were slowly undone by the fragility of small numbers, an invisible biological war they couldn't win, and the sheer force of our expanding population. Kale stands alone on a windswept cliff, profound sorrow in his eyes. The last Neanderthal didn't fall to a spear. They likely simply failed to find a mate outside their immediate family, or they passed away from a disease their ancestors had never encountered. But their legacy is profound. Every non-African person on Earth carries a piece of them, genetic ghosts that influence our skin tone, our hair, our sleep patterns, and our immune systems. Kale and Eric standing side by side, hybrid child playing between them. The Neanderthals vanished, but they are not gone. They live on in us. Close-up, highly detailed portrait of Kale's wise, resilient face.